Thank you so much, May. Thank you. Now, as you heard there, we're going to talk about equality versus equity and what that means day to day. Let me run you through some of the numbers, because nearly 2.4 billion women around the world don't have the same economic rights as men. So I want us in this session to look at what equality means versus what equity means, why they are different and why that is so important, particularly when it comes to how leadership works. Does empowerment mean treating everybody the same and creating specific opportunities to create a level playing field, or is there something more fundamental that needs to be addressed? So to discuss that, please welcome my panelists. Who are? Oh, please, come on up. There you are. Normally you're coming from the distance. It's hard to see from up here, so please come and take a seat. Nice to see you. So let me introduce you to them. Amnah Ajmal, who is Executive Vice President of Market Development, Mastercard. EMEA, Dr. Saundarya. Rajesh, who's the founder, President of the Avtar Group. And Shivani, Bhasin, Sachdeva, who's the founder and Chief Executive of India Alternatives. Welcome to you all. Really good to have you here. Thank you. Shivani, let me start with you if I can, please, because talk to me about that very issue, equality versus equity. There is a really important difference here, isn't there? Just highlight, for people who aren't aware of those two terms, they tend to be used interchangeably, incorrectly. Why is it important that we talk about them?
I think it's really important to talk about equality versus equity, because just because you say today, let's make sure that everything is equal between men and women, that doesn't mean there is equity. So I'll give you a very funny example. But let's say you look at washrooms in a space, right? Let's say you look at a mall and you say that there is a certain amount of area for washrooms. And let's say that the person designing it decided that it should be equal. Now, if you have equal space for washrooms for both men and women, this obviously means longer queues for women. Women will take longer in the washroom. So there will be, again, it'll be more inconvenient. I know I'm throwing out a very funny example just to wake people up at this time, but so therein is an example of where someone thinks that they're being equal, but there's really no equity in this.
It's a really important, it's a really good analogy.
Yeah. So.
And let me bring Dr. Saundarya in here, because you're such a champion for women's inclusion. And I talked about this with our comedian at the start of this, with Meena. That why are we still talking about this? Why are we still needing to talk about this in 2024? But it is still a big problem, isn't it?
Because I think it's a lot to do with the money behind it. Because it's business. India loses about 20% of its GDP because we do not have gender equity in leadership. $40 billion is lost by the UAE each year because the number of women in the workplace is not matched by the number of men, in the sense that the same equal number of men and women does not exist here, right here in this amazing cultural, sort of a coming together that happens here in the UAE. Mm-hmm. And when you look at equality and equity, I think it's very simple. Let's not get confused about the two terms. Equality is like kind of, the destination, and equity is the route you take towards that. So if you were to, very simply look at it this way, equity is about a little more of the pesky, irritating, tough things that you have to do in the workplace. Like you have to challenge a microaggression. You'll have to look at, unfairness and then call it out. You'll have to look at different policies for men, women, for Emiratis, for expats, for people who've taken a break in career and come back. So for all of these things, if you have to have different policies, that is equity. Equality is slightly broader issue. And from a workplace perspective, it's always going to be work in progress. So, there's this joke about equality and equity, saying, once the two of them, there was a equality advocate who came to an equity party, and what did he bring? He brought a ladder because he wanted to, take the level up to the next level. So you have a lot of discussion going on about equality and equity, but suffice to say that for every country, every business, inclusive teams, diverse work cultures, and business success matter.
Yeah.
And the route to that is equity, which means doing something very specific for each community, each level of career, each kind of ability, each gender, each race. So how can you give them what they need in order for them to succeed?
Yeah.
That's really what equity is all about.
And Amnah, Ajmal there on the end, welcome. And I'm going to fixate around the use of language here too, because it is so important to get this language right. And I want to use the word empowerment as well, because, and let me put this to you, does empowerment mean treating everybody the same?
So maybe I may not be the most appropriate person for this panel. For me, it doesn't matter. I do not think it's worth debating equity versus equality or empowerment, inclusion, does it mean equal or not? The fact that the last UN report said that it would still take us 136 years to achieve gender parity, it should be enough for people to just wake up and take some action. An action can be small, an action can be big. And when I'm at this stage over here and I'm sharing my voice, I would say each one of us here in this room, or people who are watching us, or people who know on social media that we're talking about this here, they have a responsibility. Just do your tiny part and the world will change.
What might those parts be?
Let me give you a small example. I was talking in the morning at the Global Women Forum, right? I have some great, super talented men in my team. One of them is a brilliant father. He had twins. He's making sure he's there for their bedtime. He's making sure that actually he is always doing the drop-off for his kids. But how many times do I see men talking about childcare at work? I'm a senior leader. I would say in a day, if I'm attending 14 meetings, at least 2 of them I'm mentioning my kids, right? I don't see my men peers doing that. Why? Even though they're doing the same because the world has changed, they don't do that. So this particular individual, why won't he talk about the fact that he's such a great father and he's doing that? He would talk to me one-on-one. So I encourage him, say that in the open space. There are 5 women sitting next to you in the open space, you would normalize childcare. So the woman over there who just returned from maternity leave would not feel that she's the only one who has to leave at 4 p.m. because she has to pick up her kid from daycare. It's such a small action. By doing such a little thing, you would actually normalize childcare. It's not a gender-specific thing. Let's forget about definitions for a second. Let me give you a second example. If I'm talking over here about gender equity, equality, empowerment, inclusion, world should be the same and all of that, I go to my office and I'm doing my town hall. 80% of the people in my team are men. And then I say, oh, you know, because financial services and technology is a very male-dominated world. I'm not walking my talk. And people can see through it. So you have to walk your talk. 70% of my direct leadership team is women, running massive big P&Ls. Risk-taking. How many times do we say that let's go for an external candidate because we cannot find an internal candidate fitting for this role based on a 1-hour interview? We can give a job highly likely to a man, but we would not look around in our own office and say, here is a woman, 60% she qualifies for the job. Research proves that women do not raise their hand as long as they do not feel they qualify 100% for the job. Men raise their hand for a promotion even if they're 50% qualified for the job. It means as a leader, I have to push the women, whether I'm a man or a woman. Doing such a small thing, if its job is open, you go to one level below, the grade which is one level below, for whom this could be a promotion, and say, hey, why don't you apply for this job?
Yeah, yeah.
These are the things we need to do if you want to change the world.
I also find it astonishing you said you might not be an appropriate person for this panel. I mean, you've just given us the most amazing examples of why you are appropriate for this panel. So, and Dr. Saundarya,
Yes.
Let's look at some of the change that needs to happen. And we heard brilliant examples there of what it looks like at Mastercard. Little actions, big actions. We can all take these actions. Where do we start, though? I know a lot of work is already happening, but it's hard for people to get a grasp of what significant change, just a little action, talking about childcare, bedtime, going home, can mean.
You know, in India, my company, Avtar, we run the nation's largest diversity analytics exercise, which is called the best of the best, in India. And 2 months back, we brought the same program here to the Gulf. It's called Best of the Best Gulf. And what essentially happens there is really a coming together of organizations that say that these are the things we do in order to make that change in our workplaces. So they talk about mentoring, they talk about sponsorship, they talk about bringing back women after a break, they talk about upskilling, they talk about, leadership influence, like what she was mentioning. So there's a bunch of all of that happening. And in India, over the course of 8 years, we have had a 9 percentage point increase in the workforce representation of Indian women on account of this kind of a movement. Yep. But if you ask me to pick one thing which all of us can do, and it doesn't matter if you're a big corporate, small corporate, if you're a MSME, if you're an individual, but you want to do something to make sure that that change happens, that equality, which is the goal, happens, then I will pick self-awareness on biases. In every organization, in every business, and we work with about 400 organizations in India and another equal number outside of the country. And we find 3 biases which actually really create havoc. The first bias is bias in hiring. And we do not know that we hold those biases because these are non-conscious biases. The second bias is bias in customer service. Without even knowing, we offer biased customer service to different kinds of customers. We treat one kind in a particular way and we treat another kind very differently.
And it's too easy to pretend that is about personalization, isn't it? Or the idea that we're offering something unique.
If it really results in personalization, that's great. Yep. But if it results in me feeling small because of the color of my skin or because of the fact that I dress differently and I'm not receiving that kind of a service, then that is a bias. Yep. Yep. And the third kind of bias that we find is bias in product development, where you have actually, for instance, very recently, I think a couple of days back, I heard about this, gaming controller or console called Protean. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. It's actually a console which can be put together, completely dismantled and put together because it serves gamers of every kind, gamers of different abilities, gamers for people with disabilities, women with small hands, and because the business wants to increase the kind of customers they want, they sat together, put their heads together and said that we cannot have this one type of gaming controller because that means it doesn't help everybody experience that product in the same way. Yeah. So if we are able to tackle these 3 biases, bias in hiring, bias in customer service, bias in product development, I think we'd have done our bit for the world.
Yeah. One size does not fit all, does it? Shivani, let's look at this from an investment point of view, because I know that's your expertise as well, isn't it? And talk to me about the gender lens when it comes to how you might choose investment opportunities. What does that change about the mindset, do you think, about how you would consider investment?
I think it completely changes the mindset. I think what's happened over time is in India, you have many more women that have gotten into things like accounting, law firms, even startups. So lots of women that are starting companies. If you look at pre-COVID to post-COVID, I think the last data that I pulled out from DPIIT showed that around 3,600 startups were run by women. But the problem is, in my business, I'm a private equity investor, I'm a fund manager, there is an abysmally low percentage of women. So what that means is you have a whole bunch of men that are making investments. So oftentimes, to pick up her point on bias, they don't realize it, but the lens is biased. So you don't have things that would be beneficial to women that are getting invested in. Of course, for me, my primary objective, because I have a fiduciary responsibility to my investors, it's not my money, so my fiduciary responsibility to generate returns. From a return perspective, it's ridiculous as well. Because of the fact that if you look at the global market and women as influencers, and this is even more true in India, right? And let's say women control 60 to 80% of all consumption decisions. Then I would argue that it is the largest addressable market in India with a potential of $1.5 trillion. So if you don't apply gender lens investing, you are doing women a huge disservice. You may enter a strange world where women are excited about starting these companies, but are just not getting enough funding for them to grow and succeed. And you are doing yourself a disservice because you are ignoring one of the largest markets out there. So it's not that you're doing anybody a big favor by putting on gender lens investing, it's simply smart business. And in fact, the IFC World Bank came out with a report that said that women balanced funds, so gender balanced funds generate, I think it was 1.7 percentage points incremental IRR every year. Now that doesn't sound like a lot in 1 year, but if you think about that compounding over a decade, that's a significant difference. So what I would like to bring to bear here is that we're not doing women a big service by the point of equity and equality. It's smart business. It's helpful to everybody. To draw your point about, even paternity and why should the woman do that. In fact, I was addressing a whole bunch of people recently at a large financial services firm in India. I was addressing the men and the women. And I asked the men as a thought experiment, I said, how many of you would be unhappy if you could go home at a more normal hour and spend a little bit more time with your family? Or rather, how many men in the room would like to do that? Every man in the room put his hand up. So I don't understand what we're doing.
Yeah, yeah. And a final thought to Amnah on the end, because that is absolutely the point. And we were talking about this as far as sustainability is concerned next door. It's not a nice to have. It's not a, but I'll do it because it's paying lip service to it, or because it's good for business.
It's not just lip service. It's not like I'm going to do this because I feel so good. I'm a gender rights activist. Yeah. You're just a smart business person.
Yeah, and it is good for business. If your organization, be it Mastercard or any other organization, reflects its customers, that has got to be a winning formula, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's also high time that we stop justifying it, because it's so simple. If you cannot run a world where half of the world is not included in designing that world or in running that world. It's as simple as that.
Thank you all. There's so much more we could talk about, but we rattle through it. And I know these discussions will continue over coffee outside, as they always do. So I'm really grateful to you all. Ladies and gents, my panel, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lovely to see you. Thank you.